We have both been a fan of the moves the Chargers have made early on in free agency, especially considering their cap situation. But Coupon Tom is really going to have to strike late if the Chargers want to fill in the rest of the gaps.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 7 seasons, but this is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe on YouTube and follow the show wherever you get your podcast from. But today, we are talking about what the Chargers have done, and just our first impressions of what they were able to do in Week 1, considering what they had stacked against them. So we're going to talk about the signings that they have made, coming up with this space to bring back key important roles and starting roles for this team so they have less holes going into the draft, but also realizing, David, that Tom Telesco still has work to do with this roster. Still a lot of depth pieces and maybe even a couple of starting spots that are still out there and need to be addressed. And we're going to talk about which position groups we're most concerned by, or the position groups I think with the biggest question marks. And then we'll also be getting into the tight end group, which has one less question mark now, isn't as in dire of a need because they brought back Donald Parham, they had Gerald Everett, but that should not stop the Chargers from still potentially drafting a tight end early. But let's start with what they have done, David. I mean, I'm pretty happy with what the Chargers were able to do in a vacuum. You know, like I like to say, it hasn't been much. There hasn't been a lot to move the needle, but considering where they were only a couple of weeks ago with the salary cap, I mean, bringing back the pieces that they have is really, really crucial.
It is really crucial, and it's because I think there was a large portion of this offseason where we had to seriously contemplate the fact that the Chargers could have potentially moved on from a Keenan Allen or a Khalil Mack, or a Joey Bosa. We figured that one of those big contracts had to get let go of because of their current salary cap situation, but that was not the case at all. The Chargers restructured 4 different contracts to not only get them under the cap, but to give them enough operating space to bring back some key free agents and some guys that you felt like really are going to be a stable part of your team going forward. So to see them be able to do that and to be able to make the moves necessary to put themselves in position to not have to worry about those positions in the draft, I think is something that's commendable.
I like what they've done, and I understand the frustration of, okay, well, guess what? You haven't really added much to this team. The only external free agent at this point is Eric Kendricks. But at the same time, when we were looking at this roster and what they were going to have to do, even though we also said, hey, I can't see them moving on from Keenan Allen, can't see them moving on for Khalil Mack. But getting to a point where you could bring back a Trey Pipkins, bring back a Morgan Fox, I think was absolutely critical for them. And I mean, we were talking about the big 3, pre-free agency.
Yeah.
How are you going to find a way to bring back Drew Tranquill, Trey Pipkins, Morgan Fox? Those dudes are so crucial and were such a big part in, some of the bright spots of a season that had, a lot of ups and downs, I think, to say the least.
Definitely.
They found a way to fill all of those holes. Those are 3 starting jobs you potentially had walking out the door, and you were able to fill it. And at least right now, David, yes, there's a lot of work to be done, but most of the starting spots are accounted for. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of spots where you'd say, hey, you could use an upgrade at that spot, but there's not a lot of starting jobs where right now they're saying, hey, we have to find a rookie to fill this role.
And I think it was really important to get that right tackle position locked up. I just love the chemistry and the cohesion that brings to the table. Now you have your offensive line locked up for several seasons. You can get these guys playing together, get that chemistry really going. And then Morgan Fox, I love that move.
Trenches,
I just thought there was
the trenches.
No way.
Take care of that.
I mean, investing in the spine of your team. I've said it over and over and over again because it's so important. I thought there was no way that they were going to be able to bring Morgan Fox back. And not only did they bring him back, but the value of the contract seems unbelievable. Yeah. How do they get that done? Just considering the production, the 6.5 sacks, and you get him for $7 million, a little over $7.250 million for 2 years. I mean, It seems like that's what he deserves for an annual value on the
easily.
contract, right? So,
Easily.
I mean, just a fantastic move on both sides of the ball to be able to get those guys back. And if they even perform at, even the same level that they have been, then you're going to get tremendous value from those positions. So to be able to come out of the first week of free agency, not having to worry about your right tackle position, having an interior pass rush presence to hopefully pair with Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. I mean, those are some exciting developments as we continue and, we're traversing the rest of free agency.
The Morgan Fox thing honestly makes me feel bad because seeing what some of these other defensive tackles have been making, but it's also a shrewd, very good business move for the Chargers to do.
It is.
To have him locked up for 2 seasons. They still have an out even after the first season if they really need it, but it's not going to take much at that position to be able to earn what that contract is. Like I told you before, Daron Payne's making $22.5 million per season.
That's such a joke.
Morgan Fox is a better pass rusher than he was last season, right? Draymond Jones, $17 million per season. He's up in Seattle making that now. Morgan Fox was a better, more efficient pass rusher than he was last season. So, those deals have been crazy. And, that's the other part of this. And I think the other part we feel good about is just the fact that not only have you been able to bring back these key roles, bring back key starters, but it doesn't feel like you've really overpaid for anyone. It doesn't seem like you've overextended yourself in any way. At the same time, this is actually, David, where Tom Telesco historically does the best, his best work is this time of the offseason, and he's going to have to do it with, the other spots we need to kind of see filled.
Absolutely. I mean, last year it was bringing in guys like Kyle Van Noy, like Bryce Callahan. I mean, bringing
Morgan Fox,
Morgan Fox, bringing in like a Troy Reader, just bringing in guys that you feel like are going to solidify the depth of your football team. And he's going to have to do that again this season because I feel like overall, I mean, you look at most of the positions and you feel pretty good about what you have there, but you know that it's thin and you need to add some quality depth to those positions to make you feel better about, how they're going to handle the season, Daniel, because injuries are going to happen. You have to worry about it, and you have to make sure that, you add to those positions while you can, and the Chargers still have some spending space to be able to get that done.
That's the big thing. They have some space to continue to address some of these things, and I think there's certain positions where you'd feel a lot better about them going into the draft if you had another veteran in those rooms,
Yeah.
There's not a lot of starting spots available. Safety is one of them. We'll talk about the big question marks at safety right now, as well as edge rusher and wide receiver too, because those all feel like things where those are the next on the list of things that must be addressed. Even though when you're looking at the depth on this roster, David, you would struggle to bring me a position group where it didn't feel like you could use something there, right?
Yeah.
Even, besides the one I just mentioned, running backs, depending on what happens with Austin Eckler, offensive line is a huge one.
Definitely.
A lot of question marks there. There's a ton, but there's some that are more dire than others, and there's some where you kind of need to see something happen in free agency, because if not, it means you're going to really have to spend a very valuable draft pick on those guys at the beginning of the 2023 draft and giving yourself less flexibility there. But we have seen the Chargers gain flexibility so far during the free agency, if nothing else. I mean, I think there's good reason to think that Trey Pipkins is going to play better than he did last season, right? There's a chance that Eric Kendricks is better than the version of, or fits better than what Drew Tranquil did last year and helps maybe the run defense a lot more than Drew Tranquil did. And hopefully, puts a little bit of water on that fire because it was huge last season. Yeah. So the thing is, though, is Tom Telesco has to find this year's version of those guys. He has to find that situational pass rusher in free agency. He has to be able to find some guys who are going to come in on the low and play big roles for this team. Last season, even through all the coupons that we've seen him, right? Yeah. Casey Hayward. I'll go back to even someone like Patrick Robinson. Ode Ibushi, before he got hurt, was a great quality, low-key signing. I mean, you could even make the case where Jared Cook came in and had a very productive season when they needed a starting tight end for what he came in and signed for. So, he's done a good job. Last season might have been his best job. And the Chargers, even with a good start to free agency, we can give it a good grade now because they're also realizing that there's still a lot of work to be done, and that's what Tom Telesco has to do now. The good news is this is usually where he does his best work. But the positions that have to be filled and are most dire right now, to me, safety, potentially a starting role available there. Edge rusher, considering the time that Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack missed. And receiver with the time that Keenan Allen missed. And Mike Williams ending the season with a fractured back. Those positions all have question marks, so we're going to break it down after this. But I do need to tell you guys about the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast, and that is FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and the tournament is heating up right now, guys, with games set to resume this Thursday. Make sure you get on the action before that, because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win, and this is the time for Cinderellas. This is the time where you can truly make some magic happen. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use, and then you can bet on everything from money line, point scores, and threes drained. You can also include spread, money line, total, player props like points, rebounds, assists, things like that, or you can do the 2x3, 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. And since it's FanDuel, you can also do the same game parlay, which is a game changer, betting on multiple things inside the same game and stacking them together. So don't miss your chance for that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. At this point in free agency, even with everything we've talked about and how happy we've been with it, there's still a lot that has to be addressed. And we are assuming some of these positions are going to be taken early on in the draft. Even with that being said, it's still a little uneasy to see where the roster stands at some of these position groups if there weren't any more moves made between now and the draft, right? And the one I'll start with here is safety. This is one of the only positions where you could argue there's a starting spot available. It entirely depends on what you think of Alohi Gilman. But right now, this is where they're at on the roster with guys who have actually played snaps, for them. The guys that are really in the mix, Derwin James, Alohi Gilman, and JT Woods. JT Woods, total question mark and a total liability last time we've seen him. Alohi Gilman had his best season yet and played extremely well, but there's obviously some limitations there. And then you have Derwin James, who you feel really good about. But that has to be on this list, David, of the biggest kind of needs still at this point in the offseason, because it feels like at the very least you need competition for Alohi Gilman.
Yeah, I think that you like the kind of way that Alohi Gilman changed his game last season. He was definitely more of a contributor. He was less of a guy that you were scared to death of watching on the football field like he was a little bit earlier on in his career. And to his credit, he really turned himself into a quality football player, a tenacious guy, a
playmaker.
Yeah, definitely a playmaker, a guy that Brandon Staley said that has a calmness about him, who just really understands, his role. And so that's definitely a guy that has a lot of potential going forward. But yeah, I don't know how you can sit there and feel confident just because he has only started a couple of games in this league. I mean, just overall. So you would feel a lot better about adding someone who has a little bit more experience, John Johnson III,
right?
Maybe, right? He's still out there, still seems like a perfect opportunity to add him to the mix. But yeah, JT Woods is a huge wild card until he kind of proves the fact that, he can tackle somebody on the football field on a regular basis. You're not going to feel really good about that. And, DJ is Mr. Everything. But in order for DJ to be Mr. Everything, I think you need to have somebody that's quality there to support him.
And since he's been in the league, they've been looking for a player to pair with him. They've been looking for the perfect complement for him. He started out playing next to Jaleel Adai, right? And then Nazir Adderley was the guy who was supposed to be that perfect complement to him. And, that's why they drafted him in the second round. And he had the tools coming out where he felt like this complements Derwin James's game well. Alohi Gilman, even as a great player, isn't the most stylistic fit next to Derwin James, right? He's a guy that can be in the box and be a playmaker, and you can move around the field a little bit. But as far as just a all the time split field, cover two safety, that's not really what he's, best at. Or even
that could be JT Woods if you could tackle a little bit better.
Sure, exactly. And the easiest way for them to fill it is with John Johnson. I'm still hoping that moves happen. We're optimistic that it makes too much sense, especially as the market keeps going by. We just saw, CJ2J get and sign the biggest safety on the market. That domino has now gone to Detroit. So maybe that kind of kicks this thing into gear a little bit, but that was 1 year, $8 million for the guy who was tied for the league lead in interceptions last season. That kind of shows you where the safety market is at. Still something that potentially is out there.
That's where a lot of these markets are at.
It makes too much sense for me. Yeah. But it still has to happen. You can't totally bank on it, which is why this position kind of makes the list right here. And to just get, I think helps the timeline with JT Woods. And helps not put as much pressure on Alohi Gilman. At edge rusher, another one where you look at it and you say, okay, well, you have Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. That's a great start. Not something that seems like a need. But David, Chargers fans know better, right? Because Chargers fans know exactly how much guys not named Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa had to start for the Chargers last season.
Man, I can't tell you how many times I was sitting here on this podcast last offseason saying, man, I can't wait to see Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack out there at the same time. I wanted to see how that's going to look over the course of an entire season. And we got like 3 games. And I was like just so upset. I mean, the potential is insane with that pairing. But unfortunately, if you can't get on the football field, you can't help me. And so with both of those guys, there are injury concerns. Joey Bosa missed a large portion of that season. Khalil Mack, as you had mentioned before the show, had missed 10 games this season prior to last season.
Yeah,
and
2021.
he's, right, on the other side of 30 years old. So we know that's going to have an effect. So, and also we saw what it looked like when Joey Bosa was not in the lineup. You had Kyle Van Noy out there trying to get pass rush. Chris Rumph, he played admirably, but he didn't really get there. He didn't get there on a consistent enough basis, so you don't feel really good about the depth of that position. So you know that the Chargers need to add somebody, hopefully a veteran, to that group that would make you feel a lot better. And not only just a veteran, but maybe they probably will visit this end of draft as well. It just feels like a room you need to add bodies to, because that is like running back is a position of attrition where you see a lot of injuries in that group.
It is. And the thing is to your point about it's nice to have both of those guys. You just can't go into this season just putting all your eggs in the basket of both of these dudes staying healthy. No. At some point, somebody else is going to have to start on one of those edges. And even if, just for rotational reasons, you need to add to that group.
Yeah.
Can you leave that big of a potential role to Chris Rumph and a rookie? I don't know. If I'd feel great about that, depending on who that rookie is. Right. Because you're going to need contributions, and potentially big contributions from that position, just like you needed last season. So Chris Rumph at this point hasn't shown that he can be a starter for this team. That's just where he's at. He could have a huge jump. Who knows?
I'd love to see it.
Where we're at right now, it's just hard to imagine him having to start potentially 10 games, which is what they needed from their backup guys last season, was starting 10-plus games. Right. Wide receiver also makes this list, David. Another one, we're at the top end. It's super nice. You have Keenan Allen, you have Mike Williams. You were able to keep those big contracts, right? You have Josh Palmer, who has shown he's a capable NFL wide receiver. Problem is, another one where you kind of have to brace yourself, because if last season didn't show you, when you had to have Michael Bandy playing the role he did and DeAndre Carter playing the role he did, that wide receiver depth isn't important, and Jalen Guyton's injury didn't show you that last season. I mean, we've already seen the downside of not filling this position correctly.
Yes, we have, and you just can't see it again. It's just impossible. You cannot go into this next season with what they have at wide receiver. They just don't have enough qualified bodies in that position group. Obviously, the top-end talent is second to none. I mean, those Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are fantastic. We all know that. They're probably 1 and 1A if we're talking about talent level and what they bring to the table.
Sure.
But they both got injured last year. So you know that you need to add somebody to that room that's going to add a dynamic nature to what they do. I mean, we've said it so many times. Speed and the ability to get yards after catch is not present in that room right now.
Right.
Also, what's not present, because DeAndre Carter is a free agent, is your punt returner, kick returner. You don't have anybody that has any kind of special teams experience in that room. So this is definitely a position group that looks like you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, bringing in a guy that has some experience doing both.
When you know how much they love their receivers to be able to play special teams as well.
Yes.
So that's a big part of it. But that's the biggest thing here is even if you got 2 more Josh Palmers to fill this team, right, and you had 3 through 5 are all Josh Palmers, for example, you're still missing 2 key components, yak and speed.
Yep.
Being able to attack the deep part of the field with speed, being able to have a guy that can make something happen and create on his own. They really don't have those guys on the roster right now, even with how good you feel about it, right? With the top end of it. Yeah. At this point, and in this draft, you're not going to be able to get the guy. At this point, I think that Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are both high-end wide receiver 2s. You have 2 really solid wide receiver 2s. I don't think either of them are top 10 receivers. I don't think that that's blasphemous, at least for Keenan Allen at this age right now. you don't have an option for a Jamar Chase, right? To really make those guys like giving yourself like the, perfect trio of guys that could kind of all work together in that way and complement each other there. You need guys that have that skill set. And so you're probably going to have to settle for someone that fills one of those needs, either a yak need or a speed need. It feels like, if you want to get Jalen Guyton, right, and help fill this room out to add on top of a top 100 pickup wide receiver, maybe that's the route.
Yeah.
It feels like you have to add a wide receiver early. It still feels like there's just a dynamic in this room that you're not getting. And if the Chargers have honestly put up with it for way too long and been content to be missing those key elements in that room for way too long. And I think you could also throw tight end into the, mix of somewhere where you're feeling good about it. You feel okay about the guys you have at the top, but it doesn't feel like the future of that position is on the roster as it is right now. So we're going to talk about the tight end room and also Donald Parham getting a 2-year extension or 2-year re-signing basically, but also having a fresh start under Kellen Moore. Maybe this is the way. Either way, the Chargers should not be afraid to draft a tight end early in 2023. But I do need to tell you guys first that the best available in the draft coming up is not a player at all. It's a protein bar, and I'm talking about Built Bar. Built Bar are my favorite protein bars, and it's all about the flavors for me and tasting great. Because if you're trying to eat something healthy, you're usually having to make the sacrifice of also having something that tastes good. Maybe some of you are exceptional cooks out there, and you can make really healthy things. And if you want to come cook for me, that's fine. Usually, diets are boring. You need something to spice things up. Built Bar fills that role perfectly. The best role player you're going to find, the glue guy of your diet, is Built Bar. Because you can have something that tastes like a candy bar, but you get all the benefits of what things that fit on your diet. You're getting a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, and you're getting flavors like mint brownie puff, chocolate peanut butter brownie, double chocolate almond, everything that you're looking for you can find in Built Bars. All your favorite candy bar flavors you can find at Built Bar. You're getting something that fits in your diet that's cinnamon churro flavored. You're just not going to find that in a lot of places. And right now, you can go to the nearest Walmart and pick up a 4-bar box, or go to your nearest Sam's Club and get a 13-bar box and really try all the colors of the rainbow and figure out which one is your favorite. You get a 13-bar box, you're going to find your new favorite protein bar. I guarantee it. Go to BuiltBar.com, though. If you don't want to go to the store, you can save some money since you listen to this show and use the promo code LOCKEDON15, and you'll get 15% off your next order. The tight end group, David, is something that's been talked heavily about during this offseason because it was fine for you last season, especially Gerald Everett. For what he signed for, I thought he filled that role admirably. But whether it's Gerald Everett, whether it's Jared Cook, whether it's anyone since Antonio Gates, probably outside of Hunter Henry, right? He was a guy that you felt like could kind of be that franchise guy, but he just got hurt so many times, you just had no faith that he'd be able to continue staying on the field, right? Credit to him for, the successes he's had since. But it's still a room that, as it's constituted right now, it looks too similar to what it was last season in a position where the Chargers said they wanted to upgrade it. It's Gerald Everett, it's Donald Parham, it's Trey McKitty. This isn't a dire need, though, now, David, because at least you have Donald Parham. So health is going to be the biggest thing, but the Chargers definitely pulled a Houdini act there. Didn't tender him for $2.6 million, ended up bringing him back for 2 years, $2.6 million.
That's how you do it right there. I mean, fantastic contract maneuvering by Ed McGuire and Tom Telesco. It just they really have put on a masterclass this offseason and how they have handled free agency, how they've handled the deals, how they've been able to construct these deals, to manipulate the cap hits. They've really done a fantastic job. But yes, to get Donald Parham Jr. back for 2 years for that 1-year tender price is phenomenal. And I think with Donald Parham, it's all about just getting on the football field and just hoping you get him healthy and you just get him out there for 14, 15 games and feature him in the areas that you should feature him in. Third down and in the red zone is where you should definitely be featuring a 6'8" tight end with an unbelievable catch radius. Like that just seems like, and also with Kellen Moore, right? A red zone nightmare. Exactly. And with Kellen Moore, a guy who loves to use his tight ends, I think you're encouraged. And I think that might have factored back into the decision for Donald Parham is, hey, I'm going with an offensive coordinator that has used tight ends and used them to great effectiveness. So hopefully we see Kellen Moore put Donald Parham Jr. in those situations to be most successful.
I mean, that's the biggest argument you could make for Donald Parham outside of health for him to maybe realize some more of that potential is just getting him a fresh start under Kellen Moore. I mean, Kellen Moore had, 3 tight ends that played at least 300 offensive snaps last year. He likes to use his tight ends. We've seen 3 tight ends on the field at the same time under Kellen Moore before. And he uses them a lot more traditionally where they're going to be used to block and things like that too. And that is part of Donald Parham's game that has improved tremendously. It's just his ability to block, especially at that size where leverage is always going to be a problem because you're 6'8". You're trying to get underneath other dudes' pads and move them out of the way. I've been pleasantly surprised by a guy that seemed like he would always be the guy that had to just be flexed out and used in the slot and used more as a giant wide receiver than a full, well-rounded tight end. He's come a long way in that regards.
Makes him more dangerous.
Yeah, sure. And there was so much meat left on the bone as far as 2 things specifically. You mentioned the red zone, which somewhere the Chargers need to improve from 2022 to 2023. There goes my phone. But the other place that they need to improve, specifically, David, or at least need to get better at using Donald Parham, is getting him in space, man. He is a yak guy if you use him that way. I mean, there's so many, rollouts to the right where you saw it be in Gerald Everett's hands, where honestly, give it to Donald Parham, the dude who's running a 4.6, right, and can actually eat that space up.
He is deceptively quick, Daniel. He is a guy that can really get yards after catch in ways that you would not expect from a guy that size. He is deceptively nimble.
Yeah, 100%. And I hope that Kellen Moore can be the guy that, can come in where Shane Steichen failed, where Joe Lombardi failed, and the reason this dude's only had 40 catches over 3 seasons. When the potential is so obviously there. At certain point, potential is just potential, though.
That's right.
And this is a really do-or-die year for Donald Parham because it's hard even to go into this season counting on him for some sort of consistent production.
Right.
Which is why, David, I don't think that they're going to add another tight end in free agency.
No.
But you should absolutely take one in the draft.
100,000% you should. Because Gerald Everett has 1 year left on his deal. Donald Parham is on a 2-year deal, which I'm sure they can cut whenever they want to because it's really low money. And Trey McKitty is someone that you haven't really got any kind of production out of. He was brought in to be a blocking tight end, and unfortunately has not been able to secure that role in this offense.
What's tough is that he was worse in year 2 than year 1. That's what really kind of hurts with Trey McKitty.
Yeah, and hey, he's still young, so hopefully, he can have a bounce back season and, he can start to put things together. Everyone does grow and mature in this league at a different pace. So we'll see what happens with that. But regardless of those statements, you definitely need to add someone, hopefully early on in the draft, that is a dynamic pass catcher that can grow with Justin Herbert, that can really grow with this offense, that you can have on a cost-controlled contract, and then I feel like you'd feel much better about how this room looks if you're able to do that.
And the other thing is even with the improvements Donald Parham has made, even though Gerald Everett as a smaller tight end really, gives good effort as far as blocking goes.
Yeah.
It's a pretty, one-dimensional group right now.
Definitely.
You don't really have any run blockers you feel good about, and Kellen Moore really likes to use his tight ends in the running game, especially, right? So, the other, adding on to the fact that this is supposed to be a loaded tight end class. We've already talked about multiple, 4 tight ends that we've liked so far, right?
Yep.
And, we've only watched 4 tight ends. So, there's a lot in this class. It's not what the prototypical needs are you see when people are trying to fill their draft out, though. It's edge, wide receiver, and maybe tight end is there too as far as what you're addressing early. Yeah, if you can get those 3 early in the draft in the top 100 and it fits that way, that's great. Does it ever work out like that? Usually not, right? And sometimes you have a year where you'll get a Rashawn Slater and a Sunday Seema Jr. in the first 2 rounds.
Is lightning going to strike twice? Yeah. Probably not.
Well, and, the Chargers have to see if they can fix some of their, 3rd round woes as well. Josh Palmer, Trey Pipkins doing their best to rewrite the narrative there. I mean,
absolutely.
The 3 best 3rd round picks we've ever seen from Tom Telesco are currently on the roster: Keenan and Trey Pipkins.
Right now.
And Josh Palmer. So maybe it's trending in the right direction. You need to get impact players, though. You need to have players that you're going to have to count on at some point in this season, especially getting those positions that are really kind of insurance on the veterans that not only have injury histories, but veterans that have gigantic contracts in 2024. So a lot of things, planning for the future, getting out ahead of it, and finding the tight end of the future, finding someone who can fill in at receiver, getting those qualities, finding guys that can potentially have to come in for Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack. That's where the Chargers are at. All the starting positions you're feeling pretty good about at this point, with a couple exceptions, a couple upgrades possible. They've done a lot. I've liked the way it started. Still work to be done. And you know, money, draft capital to go get it done. Now they just have to go do it. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. We will be back with you guys tomorrow, as always. Might do a Chargers mailbag tomorrow. Maybe there's some news. Maybe John Johnson signs. And we're also going to be getting into the best free agents still available at positions of need for the Chargers this week. So to make sure you guys don't miss it, make sure you are subscribing on YouTube and finding us wherever you get your podcast from. And you can also find the show on all of our social media. As always, you can find us on Twitter at LockedOnLAC. We'll probably be putting a questions post out there if we go Chargers mailbag tomorrow. You can also find us in the show every day on Twitter, on my Twitter at Dan Talk Sports, and David Drogemeyer at DroTalkSD. You can also find us on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. We also get into voicemails. We want to hear from you guys. If you want to get your voicemails on the show, you can also call into 323-524-7924 to get your 30-second question on the show. We'll try to get as many of those callers on as we can. But that's going to wrap it up for today's show. Thank you guys for making this your first listen. If you need a second listen, make it Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more, join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcast from, and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you guys for checking us out. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.